بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لله ما في السماوات والأرض إن الله هو الغني الحميد ولو أن ما في الأرض من شجرة أقلام والبحر يمده من بعده سبعة أبحر ما نفدت كلمات الله إن الله عزيز حكيم. This is chapter 31 of the Holy Quran, and I have recited verses 26 and 27 to you. And their English translation is, to Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and the earth. Surely Allah is self-sufficient, the praised. And if all the trees in the earth were pens, and the sea with 7 more seas added to it were ink, the words of Allah would not be exhausted. Surely Allah is mighty, wise. Words of Allah doesn't just refer to Sadaqallahu Aliyul Azim. Words of Allah doesn't just refer to what is in the Holy Quran, etc. Words of Allah also means the laws that have been created by Allah, upon which this universe runs. You see, the thing is this, that humans are a very arrogant creation. Every generation, people of every age think that they know everything. They have discovered everything. They have found out everything. And despite the fact that we keep on discovering new and new things and finding stranger and stranger phenomena, yet every generation is arrogant enough to think that we've done it all. There are many examples. Greeks thought that light, we saw things because light came out of the eye and illuminated whatever we're looking at. And then Muslims, many centuries later, proved that that was wrong. In fact, it was the light entering the eye, reflected from an object, that allows our eyes to see. So completely the opposite of what earlier scientists had thought. If we carry on with this example, Newton thought that light consisted of particles, in a way like billiard balls arranged in a line. And that's how it travels. Particles one after the other in a straight line. And there was a scientist called Huygens, who wasn't so famous as Newton was, and he did some experiments. They go by different names like single slit experiment and so on, and double slit experiment. And he showed that when you pass light through slits, you observe what is called interference or diffraction. Interference is when the brightness of the light is added to, it becomes brighter, or it becomes completely dark. Now, he said if light was particles, then particles would simply go through the slit and register on one part of the screen. But here, we don't have that. We have brightness and darkness in different measures. And that could only happen if light consisted of waves, like waves on a lake. If you throw a stone in, then some of them become bigger, some of them become deeper. And he said that is the only explanation for this, what's called interference pattern. If light consists of particles, you cannot explain interference. And yet we see interference. So people moved from the corpuscular theory of light, or the particle theory of light, to the wave theory of light. And many years passed, and people discovered the photoelectric effect, upon which are based all your solar cells and so on. And that could not be explained if light consisted of waves. And Einstein found an explanation for the photoelectric effect, but that meant that light was traveling like particles, like corpuscles, one behind the other. So physicists then sat around with their heads in their hands because they no longer knew whether light was particles or whether it was waves. So they came up with a neat trick. They said wave-particle duality. Basically, it means is we don't know what it is. Sometimes it behaves like waves, sometimes it behaves like particles. But at each stage, human beings thought they found everything out. Nothing more remains to be discovered. And this is illustrated by an example when a friend of a professor of physics told him that his son wanted to study physics and what was his opinion. And the professor's reply was, tell him not to bother, because we've discovered everything. We've discovered the laws of everything. There's nothing more to be discovered. There are a couple of things that are yet to be explained, but that will happen in a year or two. And then physics will become a dead science. So why does he want to study a dead science? Tell him not to bother. We don't know whether this person's son went on to study physics or not. But the point of the example was that this is human arrogance. Because those one or two things which were yet to be explained, when they were explained, like the photoelectric effect, totally dismantled classical physics and showed that human beings had not at all worked out, realized how the universe works. And this is just one example of what has happened. A few days ago, by the way, the timer is not working. A few days ago, the BBC made an amazing announcement, and that was that an anaconda, which had lived in a science laboratory for 9 years on its own, a female anaconda, gave birth to 14 offspring. How? How is that possible? There was no male around. There hadn't been a male around for 9 years. You're not talking about 9 minutes or 9 hours or 9 days or 9 weeks. So we can say, well, he must have associated with a male, and this is the result. 9 years, which female gestation period is 9 years. So obviously there is a law of procreation that we know nothing about, in which allows this to happen. Many years ago, I read about an American experiment where they took the females of a particular species of, I think, crocodile or alligator. They put them on an island. They put a fence around the island so no sea creature could crawl up to that island. And then, to their amazement, those females produced another generation of crocodile or alligator or whatever it was. And then those females went on to produce another generation. It was at that time that the results of that experiment were published, and scientists were going and checking to make sure that there were only females there, and this new generation had been produced didn't have any male issue. So those females were only producing females. And of course, guys, you know the sad thing, the sad conclusion or result of this is, guess what? That males are not needed if the human race is to be propagated. Because whatever this law is, once we find it, we wouldn't be needed. Human race could be propagated just through the female issue. And I guess there'll be pictures in museums of what males looked like, and females would turn to each other and say, why did members of our species used to associate with ugly looking creatures like that? And this is what God is referring to in this verse of the Holy Quran that I've just recited. That if all the trees in the earth were pens, and the seas with 7 more seas added were ink, the words of Allah would not be exhausted. Allah is mighty and wise. And humanity would do well to temper its arrogance in thinking that we are still discovering new species under the sea and in Brazilian rainforests when we thought we had discovered everything. I think the lesson of this verse of the Holy Quran is humility. Humility in everything. In our lives, in our dealings with other people, in dealing with other nations. When we think about ourselves, you should be humble and not arrogant like the scientists who thought that human beings had discovered all the laws in the universe and nothing more needed to be discovered. One could ask that gentleman, we hadn't been to Venus, we hadn't been to Mars, we haven't been to another galaxy. How do we know under what laws they operate? Are the laws the same on Mars? Are the laws the same on Venus? Obviously, there are some differences because they don't have an atmosphere for a start. What will happen to our bodies when we live for a long period in an environment where there is little gravity or where there's very heavy gravity? And the list goes on and on and on. And yet every human being thinks that he knows all. And sadly, when it comes to election times, they become even more arrogant. You listen to TV debates on British television and American television, you would think that the politicians who appear on them and expound their solution to UK's or USA's problems and so on are God incarnate. They have all the solutions for everything, for poverty, for illiteracy, for homelessness, for whatever. And yet they die and the poverty remains, and homelessness remains, and illiteracy remains, taking us back to the fact that it's human arrogance that creates most of the problems for humanity in the universe. So, let us make a pledge, let us take an oath to be humble and not to be arrogant. And when we discover one thing, not think we've discovered everything under the sun, but think how much more is there out there for us to discover. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quranil Azim wa nafa'ana wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malikul barrun. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasul. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma ansur man nasara dina Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ وَاخْذُلْ مَنْ خَذَلَ دِينَ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَلَا تَجْعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ عِبَادَ اللَّهِ رَحْمَكُمُ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ يَعِظُكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah, hayya ala falah. Qad qamatis salah, qad qamatis salah. Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in Ihdinas siratal mustaqim Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله استغفر الله استغفر الله. continue to read that. I forgot to mention one thing, and I request it of you now, which is that our brother Amar Aziz Sahib, Imam of Berlin Mosque, is undergoing heart surgery today. So I request all of you to pray for him, that his surgery is successful and he recovers as speedily as possible and returns to his duty. And please, of course, remember to pray for the whole of humanity, for the persecuted, that Allah may find some means of ending their persecution, and for the persecutors, that Allah may grant them the wisdom to see that they are going to be answerable for their deeds in this life, and not to be arrogant and think that they are better than others. With that, I take my leave of you. Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.